This is an emergency transmission. Citizens of the world, please, make no mistake. The zombie apocalypse is near. Will you cower and hide, or join us and fight? We are Dezombified, so stay on point and watch your six.
I've got a creepy, scary story for you, too.
Oh, yay. Okay. Okay, creepy clown girl. Do your thing.
I sent this to Mr. Haunted, but I'll go ahead and do it here. This happened, let's see. I think my brother and I was in our early 20s. And we lived at a place called Whispering Ranch, which was about 10 to 20 miles in either direction from a town. And out there, the roads are unpaved. There's no electricity, no running water. So you have to haul your water in. And the only means of light was kerosene lantern or a flashlight, which when it gets pitch black out there, a flashlight's like no good to you at all. And so our mom lived on W2. That's what they called it back then, which was West 2 and in 4. And our friend lived on N5, down N5 off of W2. Well, one day my mom goes to my brother and I, hey, will you guys go over to John's and pick up some tools I'm gonna need for tomorrow's project? We go, okay. So when we left, it's still daylight and it's hot. And John lives about a mile, maybe a little more. I think it's about a mile. So we decided to cut through the desert. We got to John's Road and took the other half a mile or whatever it is to his place. We get there and we're sitting under the shade and drinking something and cooling down. And well, we end up talking and next thing we know, it's dark. And on this particular night, it happened to be pitch black. And so we told John that we had to leave. So we grabbed what our mom wanted us to get. And we walked the half a mile down and my brother stops and says, hey, let's cut across the desert like, we did earlier. It'd be quicker than taking the road. And I looked at him and it's kind of nervous, but I'm like, okay. So we get halfway across the desert and all we got is this little beam from this flashlight. And out there, cholla cactus are everywhere. And along with greasewoods, which will tear your skin up. And we get about halfway and then my brother grabs my arm and he stops me and he goes, shh. And I whispered, I said, what? He said, listen, there's something following us. And out there, maybe it was coyotes or javelina or somebody's cows. So I didn't really pay no mind to it. So we started walking again. And then my brother, for some reason, turns behind us. And he said, don't turn around. Well, I turned around and I wished I didn't because there was 2 red glowing eyes close enough if we picked up a rock, we could throw and hit it. And we took off running and one of us, I can't remember who, had the flashlight, so the other one's running blindly. And I end up falling. And I was laying on my stomach, I believe, and all of a sudden I could just hear this thing coming up on me and I could hear its breathing and the smell was horrible. And then my brother grabs me and he's half dragging me as I'm trying to get on my feet. And we start running again and klutzy me because it's pitch black. I mean, only one flashlight. And this time somehow we got separated and I tripped over something again. And this time I rolled halfway over onto my back and there was the creature. And I could feel its hot breath. It was snarling. Like I said, the smell was horrible. I was petrified. I tried to scream. I couldn't scream. And I'm just laying there staring at whatever this is. And at this time, I'm the one that ended up, my brother came back and he shone the light on the creature, or I shone it on him. I don't remember. And this thing, I mean, if it stood on two legs, it had to be at least 6 to 8 feet tall. It had, I mean, it was massive. It was black, hairy, and its teeth were yellow and decaying. It was gross. And it's just sitting there staring at us. And it made some kind of movement. And my brother and I couldn't move at this time. And all of a sudden, you know, it just like it moved towards us. And then my brother grabbed me again and we took off running. And in process of getting up, and then we took off, we managed to make it to my mom's, and they all asked, hey, what's going on, you know, and stuff. And when we could talk, we finally told them what happened, and they all laughed at us and said, oh, there's nothing out there to be afraid of, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so one thing led to another, and I go to sleep, and I get up the next morning, and I'm walking outside to feed the dogs. And my mom goes, Patricia, come here. She goes, what the hell is that on your leg? And I go, what are you talking about, Mom? And she said, come here. And she told me, turn around. And when I did, on the back of my thigh, the right thigh, there were 3 large blood-whelped scratch claw marks going across my thigh. And my mom's face went completely white. And I think that's when she finally believed us that something happened last night. And I don't know if the scars are still there, but yeah, so that's my story. And it's real. We had just moved out there, and well, being, you know, young like we were, early 20s, whatever, we decided to go explore. Well, later my cousin would buy this property. Out there it's in 5 acres, so you can buy 5, 15, 20, 100 acres, whatever you want. And again, it's still, you know, the same place, Whispering Ranch, 10 miles from Whitman, 20 from Wickenburg. And so we decided to go walk down to, I believe it was N3 that she was on, because N2, excuse me. And so we're out exploring, and we come across this property that had this rundown 2-story house, and there were no windows or anything. And just walking on that property, I just got a bad vibe. I couldn't never put my finger on it. And well, fast forward, my cousin ends up buying the property, fixing up the house, and I would go over there, but it still unnerved me. I didn't like going over there. I didn't like that house. Well, let me give you, if I'm correct on the history, before I continue. Out on Vulture Mine Road, there was a mine called Vulture Mine, and that's where the miners used to go to mine for gold and this and that. And they would go through wagon trains through Whispering Ranch back in, I think, the 1800s, something like that. And then they would go to their campsite. I can't remember where it is right now. Next time I'm in Wickenburg, I'll go and take screenshots or video of the memorial site so that you got, you know. But one night my cousin goes, hey, you want to come over and hang out and help me with the kids? And I go, sure, no problem, hesitantly. So we had dinner, we're all hanging out. You got to remember there's no electricity, so no cell phones. So we're all just sitting around having a couple of beers. Kids are playing. Well, we put the kids to bed, and we decided around, I don't know, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning that we'd go to bed. So fall asleep fine, you know, no problem, just normal sleep. And then sometime, I don't know, an hour, a couple hours later, I wake to what sounds like horses. And I woke up and I'm thinking, all right, which neighbor's horses got out this time, you know, because this was property, so there's cows that roamed and horses. And I laid there and I listened, and all of a sudden I heard women and children screaming, heard men saying something, And oh my God, it was so creepy. And I just laid there frozen because I'm like, what am I hearing? Well, fast forward, I wouldn't be the first time I heard it. That would be the first time, but there would be more instances after that. And come to find out years later, there was a wagon train that was leaving Vulture Mine Road, the Vulture Mine, heading to their camp when they were ambushed by, I believe, outlaws, or I think it was Indians, Indians. And every man, woman, and child and horse was killed and scalped. And their wagons burned. And that's what I heard that night.
Okay. Well, this is actually a true story. Really happened to me. You know, most of my stories that I tell in Live Chat are true. When I was about, I want to say 16, I had a really close friend, and she used to spend, you know, her entire summers with me. And she comes from a big family. And she had a cousin named Michelle that lived just about a half a mile from us in Michelle's grandmother's old house. And Michelle had a baby, brand new baby, and her husband was having to be out of town for a couple of days. So she asked my friend Sean and I to come stay with her. So, okay, that's fine. You know, it's summer. What do we care? And when we got there, the first thing that happened was we were in the master bedroom, and we were helping her like fold laundry and stuff. And there was a single light bulb up in the top of the closet. And it's an older house, so the ceiling was like, I want to say 9 feet. And of course the closet door is down at your standard, whatever standard doorway is, like 6'8" or something. And I'm a good 4 feet away from the door to the closet. And this light bulb falls out of the socket and smacks me in the back of the leg without bouncing. So it fell down from the 9 feet and then flew in, you know. So that was the first thing. And we're like, okay, this is creepy. You know, can't figure out how that happened. And then that night, we were all sitting in the living room. The baby had already been to sleep. And I kept hearing footsteps because I was actually closest to the kitchen. And they had a drop ceiling in their kitchen. And I kept hearing footsteps, but it wasn't footsteps on the floor. It literally sounded like footsteps on the ceiling. And I kept kind of peeking around the corner, but I couldn't see anything. So I had, you know, the girls come over and listen, and they heard them. So we're starting to get a little freaked out, but, you know, okay, it's good. Nothing bad's happened. And then late that night, the screens on the grandmother's house, instead of being mesh screen, they were these old-fashioned, they had like little metal louvers, like teeny tiny, like each set was like an inch wide, and then, you know, one set would be pointing up, one set would be pointing down. Used to be real popular in Arizona to keep the sun out. And they're made of aluminum, so they make a real distinct sound when you run your fingers across them. So we start hearing that. And we heard it on one window, so we went and looked, and there was nothing there. Then we heard it on the next window, and the next window, and it went all the way around the house, making this weird, creepy sound. So at that point, we decided, okay, we're done, we're going to bed. Nothing happened that night, after that. The next day, we were gone. So we came back that second night, and Sean and I were staying in the same bedroom. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this glow, but like the center of the glow was blacked out, if that makes sense. So like a silhouette with a light shining behind it of a person standing right in the doorway. And I reach over and I'm like, you know, kind of smacking Shawnee to get her wake up. And she kind of rolls over and looks at it and sees it. And we both like freeze. We don't say anything because, we don't know what it is. And then it's like the light just kind of slowly faded away. So the next day, we tell her cousin Michelle, we think your house is haunted. And Michelle's like, no, I don't think so. I haven't seen anything. It's not haunted. Well, the following night, so this is like the third night, lights start turning on and off in the house in various rooms. And once the lights started flickering in the baby's room, then, Michelle's like, okay, that's it. I believe you now. And so she got the baby and we had the baby sleep in the living room where we were all sitting. And we were trying to figure out, okay, what do we do about this? How do we protect ourselves? And I don't know where I got the idea, just out of pure instinct. I said, okay, let's put salt on the doorways and the windowsills. So we went through the whole house and put salt on all the doorways and windowsills. I now know why. That's, to help make a protective barrier so evil things can't come in. And then I thought, okay, let's get some candles and light them. And we're going to start praying. And we're going to tell this thing that, in the name of God, it's not welcome and it needs to go away. And so we did that, and we went through with the candles in all of the rooms of the house, even the bathroom, saying the same prayer, in the name of God, you're not welcome here, you need to go away. And then we went back in the living room and, turned the lights back on. And I don't know why we had to have the lights out for the candles, but we did. So we turned the lights back on, blew out the candles, and nothing else disturbed us for the rest of the night. And then her husband, Michelle's husband, came on the next day. So Sean and I left. So I don't know whatever happened with that. And I don't know where I had the idea to do these things, because this is before I had learned anything about, paganism or spells or, I didn't know anything. It was just pure instinct. But that's my haunted house story.
This story is called Chains, and this is just a snippet of it because I'm not finished it yet. I watched the last of the grocery store employees leave as they waved to me. The automatic doors slid shut, and I locked them. I turned around and surveyed the empty store with satisfaction. I love not having to deal with people. I applied to be an overnight janitor here for that exact reason. So from 11 to 5 a.m., I was alone. I grabbed the large push broom from the back, put on my headphones, and blasted my music and got to work. For the first hour, everything went normally. Sweeping up and down the long aisles was almost hypnotic. I was halfway through the last aisle when a frigid breeze flowed around me, causing me to shiver and goosebumps to instantly surface on my skin. What the hell? I questioned out loud. There was no reason for me to feel the cold air. The refrigerated section was all the way on the other side of the store. I tried to ignore it and kept walking. Another hour passed, and I was mopping the floors. The breeze returned, and it was now relentless. I was shivering so much that I was having a hard time holding the mop. My frozen fingers allowed the mop to fall to the ground. Suddenly, a loud smash echoed through the store. I pulled the earphones out of my ears and stood frozen in place. I started to walk slowly towards the aisle that I heard the smash come from. I reached aisle 5 and looked halfway down the floor. There was a broken jar of pasta sauce. I sighed loudly, momentarily annoyed, thinking that another employee didn't stock the shelf properly. I reached into my back pocket to retrieve my safety gloves. As I was picking a large piece of glass up, a heavy, metallic sound was dragging along the ground. back over to where I was mopping before. This was followed along with what sounded like dripping water. I stood up, my heart thumping loudly in my chest, my ears straining. A new wave of terror fell over me as the store filled with ragged, chilling breathing that made my head spin. I gripped the glass with everything I had. My mind started screaming at me to run. I knew I had to run, but I couldn't figure out where. The terrifying noises filled every corner of the store. And that's everything so far.
Our 12-year-old daughter loved the new vintage-style TV that my husband and I bought the other day at the local pawn shop in town. She would sit there and stare at the round, blank, dusty screen with her hazel eyes fixated on the glass as if there was something playing on it. The TV was quite old and was a 1960s model, so we didn't have any way to properly plug it into the wall for functional use without the risk of damaging it. The television was more of a decorative item to give our home an aesthetic vibe to fill our empty living room. You see, we didn't particularly allow our daughter Penny to watch television because it would rot her brain simply staring at a screen all day, and hardly any of the shows were educational these days, and more so just ridiculous junk. Penny grew up with her books and magazines, which made her a very intelligent girl in school, and got nearly straight A's in everything she did, all thanks to reading and building her brain intellectually over the years. However, something about that old TV set drew my eyes while passing the pawn shop after work that afternoon. It was oddly beautiful, with its dark wooden structure and bulky screen, and a large black turn dial on the right side for flipping stations back in the day. I told my husband Tom about it when I got home, and he gave me this weird look on his face while setting down a newspaper and rubbing his stubbly chin. "I thought you didn't like television sets, Martha. Why would you want to bring something like that into our house?" "Oh, it's just going to be for decoration. Besides, the thing can't even turn on anymore, so there would be no harm in having it here in the house, right?" My husband looked off into the distance and took a sip of coffee from his white mug while letting out a low hum. I knew it was hypocritical of me to bring in a TV when we raised Penny to stick strictly to books and stray away from television, but at the same time I saw no harm in it, knowing the TV most likely wouldn't work anymore, and it would simply be for decor. I didn't want our neighbors to think that they were somewhat advanced in society, as silly as that sounded, since we were known in the neighborhood for being that family. After Tom and I dropped Penny off at the school the next morning, we drove to the pawn store to pick up the old TV, and there were lots of strange items inside. There were rows upon rows of old movies, music discs, aged collectible dolls and figurines. In the very back, but the TV is what we came here for. My husband approached the counter and rang the bell for some service when an older gentleman came out from behind some multicolored beaded curtains moments later and gave us a dead stare. He was in his late 60s or 70s, at least, with aging gray hair upon his head, and wore a slightly dirty white dress shirt and jeans with a gold chain around his sagging neck. He gave a polite smile and introduced himself with Tom, I gave a polite smile and introduced myself, with Tom doing the same, and offered the gentleman a handshake. The man scoffed and leaned against the glass counter, pulling a cigar out of his pocket and striking it against a nearby wooden leg of a pin-up statuette before taking a drag and looking us both up and down with his dark green eyes. "Sorry, don't shake hands. I smoke and all. Anyways, the name's Jack Nicholson. What can I do for you folks?" "My wife was wondering if we could take a look at that old TV set you have in the front window. We may want to buy it." The expression on Jack's face went from deadpan to shocked in a matter of seconds. He sat up from the counter and gladly showed us to it with a quick pace in his step. For an older gentleman, he definitely could move rather quickly. He explained to us that the television had been in the store for nearly 20 years after another couple dropped it off without saying a word. Tom found that quite strange, but I was too busy looking at my reflection in the screen to hear what they were saying. After a minute or two, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and it snapped me out of my daze. I turned my head and saw that the grip belonged to my husband. He asked me if I was all right, and I nodded with a cheerful smile on my face as I dusted the top of the television off. So, how much? Shit, I'd sell it to you for free if I didn't have bills to pay. How does $60 sound? Tom paused and blinked a few times with a perplexed look on his face while gesturing to the television. $60? For an old broken TV? You have to be... We'll take it. Both Jack and Tom gazed at me with surprised expressions on their faces. More so my spouse. He knew me as the rational kind of buyer that would ask so many questions before even thinking about making such a purchase. But I really wanted the TV set for some unknown reason. Jack clapped his hands together and offered to help Tom load it into the back of our car after we made the payments. Needless to say, my husband was not at all pleased with my impulse buy and gave me a lecture on the way back home as if I was a child. I felt like I made the right choice. I couldn't wait to clean it up and place it in our home. It took a good hour or so to fully clean all the dust and cobwebs off the TV, but the way it glistened and shone on our large coffee table with that fresh lemony scent from the cleaner made me feel as if my decision to purchase the TV was the best thing that ever happened to me. After throwing the dirty rags in the laundry room and putting the cleaning supplies away, Tom had just returned from picking Penny up from school, and I turned to my family, smiling brighter than the sun. Penny set her backpack in one of the dining room chairs, and Tom hung his jacket on the coat rack by the front door with the smell of the lemon cleaner. When the smell of the lemon cleaner must have caught their attention. My daughter sniffed the air, then looked over at me with a curious tilt of her head, her ginger braids falling past her shoulders. Mom, what's that smell? Did you bake something? It's awfully strong. Come into the living room and you'll see. Martha, just tell the girl no need for these silly games. But I ignored my husband as Penny followed me into the room, and her gaze immediately locked onto the old television set. I was lost in my own excitement to notice her carefully sit down on our sofa and just stare at the screen, much like I did back at the pawn shop. Tom, however, did notice, and raised his eyebrow, but didn't say anything on the matter, and walked into the kitchen to make himself another cup of coffee. The first few days I didn't pay much mind to Penny, just sitting in the living room staring at the TV, because I assumed that she was being the little observant girl she was and taking everything in. This was her first time seeing a television in our home before, so it was a culture shock for her, I'm sure. However, when her grades began to slip and the amount of homework she began doing became less and less, that's when Tom and I began to grow concerned. One night, at dinner, we were all sitting around the table, eating as my husband pulled up one of Penny's report cards and held it up for our child to see. At first she didn't notice, until Tom cleared his throat, making Penny lift her head up and stare at the paper with a blank look on her face. I sat silently across from her and looked over at Tom, waiting for him to lecture her. And did he? Young lady, what is this? My report card? Yes, and what, pray tell, is on this report card? Definitely not straight A's like before. You have a D in chemistry and are getting ready to fail math class. What has gotten into you lately? There was a long pause. The clinking of silverware and the chewing of food were the only sounds in the air. I gave Penny a worried look, but she only stared at her mashed potatoes and chicken after looking away from her father and her report card. Tom asked again, and this time she replied in a low voice. I'm sorry. It's just that I've been watching the Beckwith show lately and... Whoa, wait. The Beckwith show? What is that? It's a really funny reality TV show about a family that lives in a pretty house that do all kinds of cool stuff and have amazing adventures together. Eleanor is my favorite character because she reads books, just like me. Tom and I were both perplexed at her answer. Penny went on to tell us about the characters and their personalities, as if she had been watching this show forever. Darlene Beckwith was the mother of the household who did all the cooking and cleaning and made a new treat each episode with the recipe on the side to show everyone how to make her food. Abraham Beckwith was the father, and he always read the newspaper or went to work and taught about the values of life and how finding a good job was the most important thing, and apparently loved to dance to the radio. Russell Beckwith was the youngest son and got into all sorts of mischief and played pranks on his family and loved to play puzzles and usually asked people for their help to finish it with him like an interactive game. Then there was Eleanor Beckwith. She was the older sister and always played with her dolls and had tea parties in her bedroom. She read books out loud varying from fantasy to romance novels and science fiction. Eleanor even did hair tutorials for different styles and what dresses to wear with them. The way Penny explained this family to us with so much precision and body to her story had me personally in a state of overwhelming shock. My husband was too, but then his surprise turned into disappointment, then into anger. Tom slammed his fist onto the table to stop Penny's ramblings about the supposed TV show she was watching, making her gasp and the silverware shake from the force. I've never heard of such a ridiculous story before in all my life. How could you be watching something when there are no working TVs in this household? Is this something your friends at school are showing you? No, Father. It's always on that TV in the living room. I'm not making this up. It's a real show and they do exist. I could see Tom trying not to explode on our daughter by aggressively running a hand through his dirty blonde hair and glaring at the table. I myself was quite flabbergasted. How could Penny be watching this show if our TV doesn't even work or turn on? Penny had this hurt look on her face since we didn't believe her claims of the Beckwith show. But how could we? My husband let out a frustrated grunt and pointed a finger at our daughter, her report card falling to the floor. I have had it with your lies and make-believe stories, Penny. If you don't get your grades up, you can forget about that book fair trip this weekend. What? That's not fair! End of discussion. I don't want to hear another word about this Beckwith show or about these stupid make-believe characters. Now finish your dinner and then go work on your homework. Penny closed her mouth as large tears swelled up in the corners of her eyes. I tried to get everyone to calm down and sort this out like a civil family, without all the shouting, but our daughter was having none of it and hastily stood up from her chair and slammed her hands down on the table, glaring angrily at Tom with this foreign fire in her eyes that I had never seen before. I hate you! I wish Abraham was my father and not you! With that, Penny ran out of the dining room in a fit and grabbed her backpack before disappearing around the corner towards her bedroom. The sound of her doors slamming shut echoed through the house. My husband was speechless at her hurtful words, but played it off well in front of me by finishing the rest of his food, then leaving to retire for the night, leaving me alone at the table in my own thoughts. I decided to clean up at least and save Penny's leftovers for tomorrow, then got started on the dishes, her words still ringing in my ears. Our daughter had always been such a respectable young lady and did what she was told, but now she was starting to change. She became more distracted from her work by this silly show she rambled on about. It had to be something from school. The TV here doesn't work. Or does it? I put my mind at ease. To put my mind at ease, I loaded the dishes into the dishwasher, then made my way towards the living room and stared at our vintage television. It stared back at me as lifeless as ever, and the room was so still it was slightly unnerving. Nevertheless, I walked over to the set and kneeled down in front of it, slowly reaching out and turned the large black dial, but nothing happened except a few clicking noises. The screen was blank and there was no power cable hooked into the wall or within the TV. I felt rather silly doing this and let out a breathless chuckle with a shake of my head. I was acting ridiculous, letting my mind fester of some broken television. Dusting my hands off, I got up off the floor and left for bed. Click, click, click. I woke up to the sound of faint clicking coming from the living room and groggily got up from bed, rubbing my eyes. Tom was still sound asleep, unbothered by the noise, so I took it upon myself to investigate and slipped out of the safety of my covers into a pair of slippers and a nightrobe while making my way out the door and down the hallway. The clicking kept going on with a few seconds set apart from each other until it suddenly stopped. Curiously, I peeked around the corner and saw Penny kneeling in front of the television in her flower-printed pajamas, turning the large black dial. I made moves to go out and question her what she was doing in the living room so late in the night, until her giggle stopped me from revealing my hiding place. Penny had her hands folded in front of her and smiled up at the screen, fixated on it, and would talk or answer questions once in a great while, as if she was talking to someone in front of her. I felt a chill go up my spine, but continued to listen into a conversation. "Hello again, Darlene. What did you make this time? A chocolate pie? Yummy. I love chocolate, but Mommy says it's bad for your skin." She paused again for a while, then continued to conversate with the TV again. This went on for a good hour, and I was starting to grow tired and heavily concerned for the mental well-being of my child, until something came up into her conversation that made all the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "I wish I was part of your family. Then I could be happy, like you guys. My parents don't listen to me or understand me, but you guys do." Another pause. My breath felt like it had been taken away. The thump of my heartbeat rang in my ears and into my ribcage. I could have easily gone out there and put an end to a make-believe conversation, but the way she spoke to the TV wasn't whimsical or make-believe. She spoke to it like a real person. I tried to ease my conscience, thinking that children have imaginary friends and that perhaps this was Penny's version of them. But even so, this was unnatural for her. Taking a deep breath, I decided to put an end to all this and rounded the corner, ready to scold my child. But when I went into the living room, Penny was nowhere in sight. I searched everywhere. The kitchen, the dining room, under the couch, behind the TV, in the bathroom, and even to her bedroom. But she was gone, vanished into thin air. I didn't hear her leave the room or make a sound, so how could she have just disappeared? She was just sitting there in front of the TV, and I turned away for 1 second. 1 second too long. I informed my husband of what happened. He didn't believe me and told me that I was most likely sleepwalking. But when he began to notice Penny's absence the next morning, that's when he decided to call the police and file a missing child's case. The police looked at us like we were a couple of crazies, but there was no other way to explain it. Penny simply vanished from our home that night after commenting on how she wanted to be part of this Beckwith family. But when we told the police about the show, they looked at us even more confused. "The Beckwith show? Never heard of it before. I don't think there was ever a thing. We'll look into it, but we can't guarantee any feedback." Needless to say, the officer was right. There were no records of any Beckwith show ever airing on television from the 1960s till now. It never existed. There was no Darlene, Abraham, Russell, or Eleanor. There was no show. Nothing. But then where did our daughter go? Or what was she rambling on about? I guess we'll never know. Penny was never found. My husband and I had no idea what to tell our parents or our neighbors. and we decided to finally get rid of that damn television set and sell it back to the pawn shop. Jack shook his head and took another drag from his cigar, chuckling under his breath. He told us that he knew this would happen. The last couple did the same thing, and did the previous one before them after their kids also strangely disappeared. Tom and I gave Jack a confused stare, to which he simply handed us 2 newspaper clippings, one dating back 20 years ago in 1999, and the other in 1978. In 1978, a young boy by the name of Russell Wilson had disappeared from his house without a trace and was never found dead or alive. In 1999, another child disappeared by the name of Eleanor Albright from her home and was also never found. I put my hand to my mouth in shock as Tom held the newspaper in his hands, flipping through them wildly, Jack only sighing and shaking his head. I just figured it was bad luck, but 3rd time's a charm, I guess. Sorry for your loss. I wish I could break the damn thing, but it's a marketable item. Can't really destroy it. I didn't mean to blurt it out, but I did. But I don't see what any of these missing kids have to do with our penny. Jack paused and looked around the store before leaning against the counter and looked out the window, watching the cars roll down by the street. Look, that TV has always carried a sour taste on my mouth since the moment it first came through those doors. My dad was running the shop at the time, and I was just some punk teenage kid, but the man who originally sold it to us said it had some kind of curse attached to it, but like hell we believed him. He told us that the TV was owned way back in the 1960s by this couple who really wanted kids, but the wife couldn't bear any of her own. Kinda sad if you think about it. Anyway, the couple went into a deep mental depression because of it and killed themselves in their living room. I don't know why they just wouldn't adopt the kids, but I guess some family members found it, and then it got passed along till it eventually landed here. I don't want to believe it, but now that it's happening again, well... Jack trailed off in his thoughts and shook his head. There were so many unanswered questions, but we never did get all the answers. Just more confusion, loose ends, and now, a missing daughter of our own. Click. My name is Darlene Beckwith, and this is my beautiful husband Abraham with our 3 beautiful children, Russell, Eleanor, and Penny. We would love to have you become like part of our beautiful family.
All right. Ever since I was a child, I've been able to, I've always had these extra senses, but one story in particular always sticks out, and I've got tons more where I've, lived in my mama's haunted house and stuff like that. But so this one's kind of bit spooky, but also bittersweet. I used to spend a lot of time at my great aunt's house, my mom's sister, my Aunt Doe. And this was before I started going to school, so I know I was really young. I can't remember my exact age, but I'm going to guess, 4 or 5-ish, and even a little younger than that. And every time I would go over there, I would go into the backyard, and there was, I don't remember when he started coming, but there was an elderly man that would come into the backyard while I was playing. He said his name was Milt, and he would just keep me company out there in the backyard, build sandcastles and do all kinds of things. And this went on for at least a year or two. Whenever I would be at my Aunt Doe's house, just in the backyard with him. I assumed he was a neighbor because he would kind of come from like a side yard. He never really he just introduced himself and said that he knew my great aunt, my Aunt Do, and that was pretty much it. And he was just very friendly, and I kind of left it at that. And after a while of my Aunt Do, like, she could see me out the kitchen window. She would see me out there talking to, I guess what she assumed I thought was what she assumed was an imaginary friend, because apparently I was out there talking to no one. I came in one day from playing. She'd been seeing this for a while. I came in one day from playing, and she's like, Kayla, I've got to ask you, who are you talking to? I'm like, I'm talking to I guess he's your neighbor guy. He's been coming over here forever. His name is Milt. And she went white in the face, and she was like, his name was what? His name is Milt. And so she kind of stopped first where she was, and then just said, hold on, and she walked away and went and grabbed a photo album. And she opened up the pages, and she just opened up to a page, and she said, do you see him in any of these pictures? And there was a picture, he looked younger, but I could clearly see that it was him and my Aunt Do at the beach. They were clearly on a beach, and I pointed right at him, and I said, there he is. And she said, Kayla, honey, that's got to be impossible. Uncle Milt died while your mom was pregnant with you. So I pointed him out. I had no idea who he was until that moment. And, my mom told me later on that, he was excited that she was pregnant with me because I was going to be the first girl, and he would have loved me. He was a great man, would have loved me very, very much. And so this whole time, a couple of years when I was a kid, I'm out there. I mean, and he was not see-through. He was just as plain as anyone, full-on flesh and bones. I went back outside to play again not long after. She showed me the photo and told me who he was. And I saw him only one more time after that. I went outside to play, and he came over, and he kind of kept it short, and he just told me that he wouldn't be able to come around anymore, but that he loved me and he would still be around. So I assume that means like the guardian angel's still watching me to this day, probably.
Okay, I'll give you one story. I'll give you a little taste. You give a taste, yeah, just a taste. So I'm in my room, right, and I'm going to bed, and my cat, one of my cats was with me. I keep cats with me so I'm not crazy, because number one, cats see shit that we don't see. Plain and simple, animals have a sixth sense that I can't explain. And when they notice shit, I'm sorry, excuse my language. When they notice stuff, they pick it up. And I happened to have one of my cats with me at the time when it happened. I had this poster on my wall, and I can't remember what age I was. I was pretty young, but it was this poster. It had a black background, and it had a picture of a fish tank and this Persian cat. But the cat was in the fish tank, and the fish was outside the fish tank, and it said switch at birth. Yeah, funny little poster. Loved it. Put it up. But that night, I remember I opened my eyes, and this thing, it was like a spherical something. It was like about the size of a softball. It had this like radiating type plasmic energy. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like, you know, radiating off this thing that was kind of circular. It had 2 eye sockets, no eyes, and it had like a gaping mouth where there was no mouth. And it came out from the poster. The reason why it caught my attention is because my cat, she was, okay, don't think crazy of me. My cat was sleeping in between my legs just because that's where she chose to just curl up. Nothing past that. That's all it was. But regardless, I felt her head jerk. Like she noticed something. And I looked down at her. I was like, Sadie, what's up? I looked, and that's when I saw this thing. It came out of the wall, and it had this, God, the movie Phantasm. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone remembers that. I mean, I think there's a scene. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I think there's a scene with some kind of an orb that has kind of a radiating, like, it looks like almost like a tracer or flame type, but it's the same kind of a smoky type residue that it leaves behind when it moves. And it shot out of the wall, and I looked at it, and it looked at me, even though it didn't have no eyes. It just eye socket. And it kind of like went around kind of in a clock cycle, and then it focused on my face, and then it just wham, shot right at my face. And I mean, I screamed and jumped out of bed. I was screaming. I was upstairs, and my parents heard me screaming, so they came running up the stairs, and they flipped my light on, and they're like, what happened? What happened? And I said, this thing just shot out of the wall. I don't know what it was. It just focused on me, and it came through. It didn't hurt me physically, but you knew it was targeting me, and I could see it, and it just, boom, right, you know, at my face. But it dissipated before it, like, you know, physically hit me. And I was like, you know, they were just like looking around. I don't see nothing. I was like, you know, I have this feeling. It's still here. It is still here. And they're like, where did it come out at? I was like, it came out near that wall. Look at I was like, oh my God, look at the poster. Look at the poster. In the black background of the poster, of the cat and the fish, switched at birth, there was an actual imprint of the thing that came through the wall. Whoa. And they could see the actual circle, or, you know, where the edges of this round thing came out. You could see the eye sockets, you could see the gaping mouth. And when they saw that, my dad grabbed that poster and he ripped it off the wall. Mm-hmm. And they took it out and they threw it in the trash, because, you know, that was just confirmation to me that, you know, I'm not going crazy. This was not like, you know, a type of lucid dream or, you know, falling into the dream. I do like dream interpretations as well. Done studies for the past 10 years or so. This was not in run state. This was something prior to. This was not, you know, like a case of sleep paralysis or anything. My cat saw it because she was the one who alerted me to it, because she saw it before I did. And, you know, it took me a moment and to look around. I just could tell it was still there. And when I looked into that poster in the background and the face that it came through, it left an imprint. And, oh God, my mom and dad both saw it. They were witness to it. And they just, when Dad ripped that down, it went in the trash. And it was, you know, I mean, as scary as it was horrifying to me. I mean, I was not that old, honestly. I think that was, how old was I? Let's see, I was upstairs already. That was pre-pubescent. So I wasn't even hitting puberty yet when that happened. Yeah, when I saw that, you know, to see that impact, I mean, it was like, wow, what the hell was that about?
Okay, so probably the creepiest thing that I had happen to me and was I was in high school, somewhere between 9th and 10th grade. This was in San Francisco. I'm not going to name the streets just because. So there was a woman that lived downstairs who was the old school hippie. At the time, I was probably 16 years old, 15, 16. And she would always tell me about this dream she used to have that was of a guy getting stabbed all the time, just this dream over and over and over again. With electricity, this was an old Victorian San Francisco home, and some reason the electricians or something had to go underneath this house. And as they were digging under the house, they found skeletal remains. And she told me that they had discovered these remains and that an autopsy showed the person had been stabbed. And the story was it was two gay lovers. One got upset, jealous, whatever the issue was, stabbed, killed his partner, and buried him under this house. So years, decades, I don't know how much later, this woman was having these dreams. I didn't think anything of it other than a cool ghost story. When I was living there, her cat had disappeared. And I was being a typical teenager, climbing underneath the house, checking out cool stuff. The old Victorian homes had a lot of servant quarters in the basement, and then below that was the stilts and the dirt areas, which is where this particular body had been found. So I was exploring around this old house and down below, and I found her cat dead on the dirt ground. And when I brought her to the cat to show her, she freaked out. What I didn't understand was that was the exact spot where they had found the skeletal remains. It also happened to be directly underneath her bedroom where her bed was. So she was having these dreams of somebody being murdered. It turns out there's a dead body under the house. And then that's where her cat actually ultimately ended up laying down to die. Freaked me out.
Okay, so I lived in a house out in the state of California, and it was a fairly newly built house. And I moved in, I want to say 2010 or 2011. I can't remember the exact year. I just know I went through a bunch of stuff there. Anyways, after seeing weird things on and on, I don't want to give too much information because one of them is going to be a story feature on our channel. But one in particular instance, and this is after dealing with weird things that have been going on in the house for a long time. My son and I was home alone, and he had been playing video games in his room all day. I had the day off, and I was watching movies, I think, on Netflix all day. Like, I was just being lazy and just enjoying my day off. So I was like, oh, okay, it's dessert time. I had already made dinner. It was, is it Memorial Day? That's at the end of May. Memorial Day? Yes. Okay. It was Memorial Day. And I told my son, turn off your games, come out into the kitchen. I turned off my TV in my bedroom. We go out to my kitchen, and I said, let's have a piece of cake. No TVs were on at this time. No air conditioning or heat or anything was on because it was springtime. It was, pleasant weather. No windows were open. It was just, calm, nice climate inside. Anyways, So I was standing at the island in our kitchen, and the way the house was set up, there was a long hallway that entered into the kitchen. If you took that long hallway, you went into where the bedrooms and everything were. And that's what connected both sides of the house. And again, this is after months on end dealing with weird things happening, pounding on walls, just unexplained things, missing, weird sounds coming within the walls, and whatnot. Anyways, no weird thing had happened that day, and I said, come on, let's have some cake. And I began cutting the cake, and he was standing beside me, and he was fairly young at that time. I would say around 9 or 10. And I started cutting the cake, and all of a sudden we heard this very deep, long growl. And the only way that I could describe it is it sounded like a mix of a man in excruciating pain and a bear, like a bear growl. And it lasted, I would say, for a good, 5 to 7 seconds. And I had stopped cutting the cake and kind of just, I got stuck on stupid and was just kind of staring into space. And I froze because it scared me. And in the corner of my eye, I see my son turn his head, look up at me, and said, "What was that?" And I didn't know what to say. And so I looked down at him, and then it was like, "Oh yeah, dummy, you have to like not let your child be afraid." So I said, "Oh, it was a loud truck or something." And so he just kind of went on his merry way and whatever. That scared me out of my wits because it was within the house. And the section of the house where it came from was the hallway. And I'm getting chills right now because I recall that feeling of fear. And and I broke out into a sweat. I called my friend that lived quite a ways away, and she was willing to jump in her car and race over to my house because she had known that I had had some issues with that house. I then began to research it, and it said that anytime you hear a growl or anything like that, that it's demonic. And that scared me even more because the other stuff that had been happening in the house wasn't demonic. It was like residual or some type of haunting or something like that. I contacted a paranormal group. I explained to them everything that I went through, and I felt silly because I was a skeptic, and I felt silly calling a paranormal group. And everything over months and months and months that I had described to them, they then told me that they think that my house was some type of portal to the other side, whether it be, the dead side or the alternate universe, dimensional beings or whatever. That scared me. So that's one little tidbit of something that I endured personally. That was, I don't know. It was scary. But that's all for now.